Solutions partner and Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Maura Gillespie, founder principal at Blue Stack Strategies. Great to have you both here. If we can dig into what we heard around this time yesterday, it was a little bit late, so maybe not everybody saw it. The fact is, no one other than Israel around the world is cheering this idea of literally taking over the Gaza Strip and displacing more than 2 million Palestinians. Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar all condemned this idea within moments of it being rolled out. Do you take it seriously?
I mean, I think you have to take whatever the President of the United States says seriously. But it's not just them. It's, I mean, several of our allies in Europe who have voiced displeasure with what the president is saying. I mean, he makes these very overarching statements, and you're talking about displacing millions of people. And I think he's probably thinking of like a resort that he could build. Like, it's such a beautiful area. We could just start. How do you tactically do that? And you're displacing people who go back to this place. It's their homeland, right? So to think he can just, take 2 million people and displace them from their country is not just irresponsible. It's bad. It's bad for the United States.
Well, and even questioned if the redeveloped Gaza would be for Palestinians. He said he envisioned it as being for the world people. Maura, I mean, when we think about Marco Rubio and others in Congress who, in theory, would have thoughts about this, is anyone going to fall in line behind this plan?
Well, what I'm most concerned by is who did he run this idea by before he made that announcement during his meeting with Netanyahu? Because from my understanding, there were conversations with Egypt and Jordan, and I understand that they were not pleased with this idea at all. Because you think about Jordan, they are one of the fourth highest populated city right now is a refugee camp that has Syrian refugees. Zaltari they're already overwhelmed. They're pretty strapped, and taking on another million people when they've already, brought in so many. I think that the dream, Abdullah has probably expressed those concerns to Trump. And do they fall on deaf ears? I think that's a concern. I think Marco Rubio could have been part of this conversation. He's already proven to show that he's got the chops to do this job, and why not bring him in and have a conversation? That's my concern basically with the Trump administration right now, is just Trump himself going out and saying these things without having real conversations with his team that he needs to be having.
Well, the White House couldn't answer most questions about this idea today. But look, he exacted concessions from Canada and Mexico with the threat of a tariff. Does the threat of something like this bring Saudi Arabia to the table with Israel? Will we be saying this was a master stroke 6 months from now?
I mean, I would say he exacted concessions from Canada and Mexico and some of the things that the Biden administration had already negotiated, and he claims victory.
Troops on the border, for instance?
I mean, he's unhinged, and I don't mean that I mean that seriously. I mean, the rest of the world is worried about what he's doing. What kind of impact is that going to have on world leaders and how they deal with the United States of America is one thing. How it positions us, with the rest of the world is, I think, very harmful. So, I think people are worried. I mean, we are the most powerful nation on earth, and what we do and what our president says matters. So, yes, of course, it's going to change how we interact with our adversaries and our allies.
Well, and when we consider what he has said versus what he's saying now, more after campaigning on no more forever wars, on this kind of isolationist bent, now we're talking about the possibility of troops being there in the Middle East to take over Gaza. Does that pivot make sense to you?
Well, it's interesting because today during the press secretary's briefing, she did say that that's not, on the table, although it was mentioned yesterday, so it is a little confusing, but she kind of shot that down pretty immediately, which then helped.
Or it hasn't been committed, at least.
Hasn't been committed. So that helped congressional Republicans say, let's see how this plays out. Let's see what the strategy is, which I think that presents a disjointed message from Republicans. And it's got to be frustrating to not feel like you're part of the conversation, to present that strong front, because then it showcases the rifts there. And it hurts the Republican Party in terms of messaging, because you're right. Voters were very clear about not wanting to have these forever wars or be engaged. And, how does this match up with his America First policies? I don't know. But I think that for Republicans, you heard Mike Johnson say, we'll see how this goes. It sort of shocked us, but we're on board. They're trying to save face because they all were caught off guard as well.
All right, Maura Gillespie and Kristen Hahn are going to be sticking.
That would, according to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, they crunched the numbers today, increase additional borrowing by 30% over the next decade to a record 133% of gross domestic product by 2035. Is that promises kept?
No,
Republicans?
But here's the interesting thing, is that those who are supporters of Donald Trump because of him as a person are going to say, well, give it time. He has to let him work his will. This is how he does it. This is his process. And they're not going to see a problem with the fact that our groceries are going to go up even higher. Our gas is going to go up. There's not going to be more housing for us. And yet there will be some of those who voted for Trump in hoping for change who will get tired with this, not seeing promises kept. But it's interesting because the Senate came out saying that they're going to jump over the House because they don't see that they have an option to reconciliation, and they're going to go with one bill because they know that their opportunity is, as Kristen pointed out, is slim here. Even with the Senate having a bigger majority, the House really only has so much wiggle room, and you have a faction that is, these budget hawks who won't be okay with what, Trump wants essentially when it comes to reducing the debt ceiling. So there's a lot of issues there that trying to do 3 bills, my goodness, it would be rough.
Well, and if you're Speaker Johnson being called out once again today by the president for just how narrow the majority is, how tenuous is his position, literally in his ability to keep the gavel?
It very much is, and he said it, I'm just testing you, is what the president said to Mike Johnson today. I'm testing you. I was testing you to see how good you are at your job. I mean, yes, they all laughed and chuckled, but that really is what's at stake here. And knowing that he only has currently 1 seater and may only have 2 going into this budget vote, that's a real problem when you have, like I said, at least 15 to 20 members who are pretty adamant about having pay-fors when you make any, talks about adding things to the budget. So it's a problem.
All the while, Hakeem Jeffries says, call me when you need me.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is, we're talking about funding the government. So let's just write the budget, funding what you need, for reconciliation, then how it all gets parsed together. But funding the government, raising the debt ceiling, all of these things, traditionally, the Republicans have needed Democratic votes. I don't think they're going to get them as easily. I mean, when I hear people saying, like, it's no problem, you'll have, 15 Democratic votes, I just do not think that is the case without them exacting some things that they want. And we're talking about reducing the debt and deficit. You cannot do that, I say this all the time, without tax reform and mandatory spending reform, entitlement reform. And that's not being addressed, and certainly the extension of the Trump tax cuts it adds to the deficit.
Right. Speaking of promises made, no one wants to touch those.
Not with a 10-foot pole.
Kristen Hahn, Maura Gillespie, great conversation. 2 veterans of the House with a reality check for us this evening.